Hey folks, thanks for joining us today here, Friday, July 18th, 2025. Today, the enablement session is going to be Scott Henson talking about workspaces. Take it away, Scott. Thank you.
Yep, thanks. Appreciate it, Glenn. Let's just level set real quick on workspaces. Workspace is essentially a alternative IDE that is in your web. It's VS Code essentially, just like the web IDE is, but it gives you the capability to customize it as necessary for your environments. Um, Also with workspaces, you have the ability to inject dev files into it to have your environment stand up with certain requirements as necessary. And there's a bunch of things you can inject into it. Um, but really what it does is it allows you to have defined development environments so your developers don't have to install VS Code on their local machine and get 15 approvals through ServiceNow to get certain plugins installed and things of that nature, right? And then, okay, so now that you've got all these things because you're onboarding, you need to do XYZ, right, to get this thing working. And now your onboarding of new developers into your project becomes difficult because they have to understand all the dependencies and requirements that may be there or weird things that require for local development. Workspaces allows you to inject those things in via a dev file, but also the workspace itself can be predefined with some certain things based on annotations in the Kubernetes cluster, um, or I should say the pods that are spinning up. And with that, you can also pass it custom images. So you can tell it to run a custom image for like your command line. So what we're going to look at today is one where I built a UBI 10 image that has the AWS CLI already injected into it, and it has a bash script associated to it that runs on launch. So when you give it a role to assume in the environment variable, that script will see that and it'll assume that role by itself. So the driver behind this was I had a customer that was running the workspaces in a centralized location. Workspaces were deployed in one AWS account on one Kubernetes cluster, a giant Kubernetes cluster. And they wanted all of their developers to be able to leverage this, but they also need to have access to their individual accounts, which all of a sudden becomes a weird thing because you need cross-account access. Um, so I was able to develop a process where you can have a centralized location that deploys workspaces, one workspace project, I should say, which is a GitLab agent, and or it can deploy that to X number of groups. We'll look at what that looks like in a pretty simple thing here in just a second. And so it allows one team to manage how many workspaces they're deploying, where they're deploying them to, how they're configured, things of that nature. Um, but then also it allows the individual teams in the projects to have a dev file that's associated to inject their specific image into has their requirements for their project. So that image can be used in their project. So when they have a new developer like Jonathan comes on board and says, "Hey, I need to work in your project," which we do all the time with customers, and now all of a sudden you've got all this spinning up to do just to get baseline functionality, right? Okay, now I understand what's happening. Instead, you can launch the web IDE based off of that dev file, or not the web IDE, your workspace based off that dev file. And now you have an environment that it suffices for everything you need. So you have access to the AWS account that you need access to. So essentially what it's doing, it's leveraging an annotation, adding an IAM role. That IAM role is then allowed to assume an IAM role in another account. So whatever team would develop that IAM role and pass it in here and say, "Hey, I want you to be able to assume this role in your development environment," right? So I've done that, and I've got it running in two different accounts. Well, I've got my cluster going in one account. I have a role in one account and a role in another account. So three accounts total talking to each other. And I have the ability I just have S3 all, so I can list buckets. That's really all I'm looking at. Um, or if you don't pass a dev file, it's going to automatically use GitLab's default dev file, which pulls an Ubuntu image, I believe. I'd have to look and see. But it's usable. It gives you a command line, right? And it's inside of your network. And these workspaces can be shut down. You can put timers to them to say they can't live for more than a certain period of time, whatever it is, right? So I don't want to beat you up with what you can read in documentation. I want to instead show you what it looks like in practice, because that's kind of why we're all here, is getting things accomplished. So let me share my screen real quick and we'll kind of walk through this. I did develop this inside of GitLab, as you do. And it's all running through a pipeline to deploy this, but it's this GitLab Agents project. This is in my own ultimate demo namespace, just so you all are aware. So this is the GitLab Agents project. This is essentially where I said it's a centralized location to deploy agents into any group, for workspaces. So what I have is this workspaces.yaml. This is not a standard file. This is just a file I created for this project to do this work. And like I said, this is just a group ID that's associated. This is the IAM role that's going to assume. These are some default things that are required for workspaces. Enabled, obviously the agent has to be enabled. The runtime, you have to have sysbox run C running in that environment. Otherwise, you don't have the ability to be root in that environment. It's not that you're actually root in that environment, because as you know, privilege access inside of a Kubernetes cluster causes all sorts of problems. Sysbox run C essentially puts a wrapper around it that allows you to run root commands inside of the environment that you're in, but doesn't give you privilege access outside of it. So it's kind of a weird layer on top of it, and we can dig deeper into that if you guys are really interested in it. This allow privilege escalation, true, has to be there because it's going to run in sysbox. Otherwise, you don't have privilege escalation inside of sysbox, so you can't run root anything. Again, it's not privileged access as we know it with Docker. It's sysbox gives another layer of obscurity to it, and this auto sizing is required for sysbox to run properly. These two are fairly similar, and that's purposeful. The only difference I have here is what's called shared namespace. So what shared namespace allows you to do is predefine a namespace where all of your workspaces are going to stand up. So by default, this workspace is going to create a new namespace for every workspace that gets created, right? Which is not really what you want to do. I mean, well, I shouldn't say that. At scale, when you're running them all in one Kubernetes cluster, you don't want to do that because you end up having thousands of namespaces. Instead, you can break it down by team, because then also if you have a shared namespace, you can predefine some of the privileges associated to that namespace, and so you don't have to have the privileges at the cluster level, right? Instead, it can go down one level to privileges inside of that namespace, which it'll then again least privilege. Right now, when I launch this one here, right, the service account here has cluster roles associated to it, so it has more access than it really needs. And so if you have predefined namespaces, right, like the shared namespace here, that allows you to then bring that down from that cluster role down to normal role binding, and eliminates its ability to look across different namespaces. So I've got both of them here kind of as an example, but you can inject it however you want to. But the good part is also, if you know this is your team and you're having problems, it's much easier to dig in the Kubernetes cluster into this namespace to find out where those problems are happening. Otherwise, this is independent namespaces, right? So it's only one namespace per workspace. Before I go on, any questions from that perspective? Super like wrap your head around it bubble right now. Um, the project I built does have the ability to inject all of the configurations that Workspaces allows for, and there's handling for it. And if you really want to dig into all that fun stuff, there is a README here that you can dig through that is like 9,000 pages long. Kind of goes through the architecture. We'll look at that in just a second. Tells you how to set everything up. But if you look down right here in these configs, right? This is how it's broken down. GitLab group ID enabled IAM role, right? All the different things that you can associate with a workspace as it sits, and this project handles for that. It's all running in Terraform on the back end, so it's gonna check all that stuff for you. But this is essentially like the default have to have or it doesn't work. And then there's some variables that you've got to set within your project. But this does leverage OpenID, OIDC, so you have to have an application built, and you've got to pass that application information in there. You already have to have a cluster that's running for this. This doesn't deploy the cluster itself, just because I didn't feel like getting into the whole creating VPCs and subnets and all that stuff that are needed for Kubernetes to run properly. I am under the assumption that you have some Kubernetes knowledge. Otherwise, you're never going to be able to debug this or problem solve on it if something, I shouldn't say when, if something goes awry. So once it's done deploying, there is no API right now to activate the agent for workspaces. It has to be done manually through the UI. So this kind of walks you through how that works. And then there's some administration stuff here. We've kind of walked through most of those pieces of it. Let's scroll back up to the top real quick. So this is kind of the breakdown. This is like super high level and super simple because the more I put into it, the more I realized it became one, unreadable, but two, 100% unfollowable. You would go and be like, hold on a second, this is talking to who, to what, to why. So the way that this is really working is you have an Nginx ingress that's running a network load balancer that's going to the workspaces namespace itself, right? And there's two entries in DNS. There's star.workspaces and there's your workspaces URL as well. Um, and this is just proxying things through. I actually just had a coffee chat with one of the senior backend engineers for Workspaces, and they're actively working to drop this whole proxy requirement here. So once that's gone, it'll actually make this much, much easier, and it'll open up a lot of this stuff where you don't have to have workarounds for certain things. It'll be the pass-through will be a lot easier, and it'll be way more expansible than it is now. But essentially, you've got this cluster here, and you've got those are kind of the bare minimum pieces of it. Then you've got GitLab itself, right? And you've got your GitLab group here, and then you've got your agent configuration. And that agent configuration is going to deploy an agent on the cluster. That's going to be these pods that gets done, or a pod, I should say, that gets spun up. And then as you create workspaces, it's going to spin up pods for that workspace itself. And you can see there's a workspace pod, that's the IDE, and then there's the actual workspace pod that's a container in the background that is an injector that is required from workspaces right now. That it goes out and pulls down specific things and injects them into the workspace to ensure it has the proper configurations to talk with GitLab and all of those other fun things. But also, more importantly, the image it leverages by default has the VS Code web binaries on it. Otherwise, you wouldn't have anything there, right? So if you pass an image, you don't have to install those binaries on that image. That's purely for your command line aspect of it. So once that happens, like I said, there's role ARN annotation that I'm passing in. That's what's allowing the service account that gets created when that workspace gets created to allow it to assume that role. So the service account by default assumes that role because I passed it into the annotation. And that role has the ability to take on a role in another account, right? But it doesn't have to be that way. It can be, I'm standing up my own Kubernetes cluster with my own role that can do things. It doesn't have to, that role does whatever you want it to do. And then it essentially creates a new IAM role. That's the IAM role that gets handed off to the dev team and says, add this to your IAM role that you want to be able to be assumed, right? So there's not just a magic IAM role that can assume anything anywhere, right? They're very specific to each agent. This agent has this role, and it has the ability to assume this specific role in this specific account, and it creates an IAM role for that. And that IAM role then needs to be added on the consumer side of it, right? The project you're trying to get to. And that's this point right here to assume the role in that target account. Again, gets kind of super convoluted. The more I added to it, the more I was like, this is not great. So I try to also explain it in kind of words here of what is happening. But I think the better piece is to, in my opinion, deploy it yourself and go play with it. This deployment is leveraging EKS. It's leveraging Route 53. It's leveraging ELBv2, right? Network load balancers. It's I threw a fun thing in there to use Acme to do my cert piece of it instead of instead of using the AWS provided ACM, because I was like, most people we're working with are not provisioning certificates through AWS. They are doing it elsewhere. So I figured if I had, certbot essentially, Acme doing it, then that could be replaced with whatever your cert provisioning process is. Once you have that, then you're good. And it deploys, or it creates all these things on the fly. So this project is a great demo project because it has the ability to use certbot to create your certs. And if your cert is expired or within, I think, 10 days of expiring, like if you run this, it'll automatically renew it within the Terraform. So this is something you can kind of like have, and it's sitting around for 6 months and they expire, and it'll just go, oh, cut me a new cert. You don't have to worry about deleting anything and messing with it. So it's really all about kind of demoing what this looks like. So let's going back to the clicked on the wrong breadcrumb there. The GitLab agents piece of it here. There is a whole um butt ton of Terraform that's associated here. So there's the workspaces piece of it itself, and this is kind of the core components to get workspaces functioning. And I'm not going to go through each one of these. If you want to dig into these, feel free to dig into each one of these. We'll be here for hours doing that. This GitLab agent is a reusable module, essentially based on every group that gets passed, or group ID that gets passed in that workspaces YAML will run against this GitLab agent to deploy an agent inside of the group that we just looked at. So let me go to my main TF, and I can kind of walk you through that real quick of what that looks like. So you can see here, right? This is for workspaces here, and this is for each, right, local agent, because it's going to look at this files from local agents to find each of the workspaces, right? It's being broken down from that perspective, and it just creates a new agent for each one of these. So I already have this deployed, so you guys don't have to watch my pipelines run, because there's nothing more annoying than that. And so within the GitLab agents project here, let me just go to my pipelines. Remember I told you it was broken? Literally my last quality pipeline ran like 27 minutes ago, right there before the meeting started. So the output of the actual apply here is going to give you a bunch of information about workspaces. It's also going to give you information about each of these agents, right? So this is the agent. This is the project ID that's associated. This is the IAM role that is created. And it's all in the documentation of where you need this. This is the IAM role that you would say, okay, this one got created for this team, add it over to their other AWS account, right? To be able to allow this role to assume a role, whatever you want that role to be. And so we're looking at Alpha Team here. There's also one called Team One, because I am super, great at coming up with cool names. And I'm really creative. So, that's the best you get out of me right now. But it's deploying this to two different environments. So that is sitting here like you would have in a normal GitLab deployment. I've got my Alpha team and team one. So if we're looking at Alpha team, what happens is this GitLab agent for workspaces gets deployed. When this gets deployed, it creates this project. There is no README here. I should probably update that, or README that's usable. I should probably update that just to have minimum information. But this is the config YAML that you would have if you were deploying this manually. You would need to create this remote development config anyway. And so it's deploying to whatever the information you passed it, right? And so here's that role ARN, like I was talking about, that it wants to assume. And so because this annotation is here, it allows the service account to assume that role by default when the pod stands up, right? So that's where the agent is. Agents are turned on at the group level, not the project level. So once this project is here and it's installed and everything is functioning as intended, if you go to settings, workspaces, what you're going to see here is all allowed agents is going to say 0, and all agents is going to be here. You can see this is the agent name that I deployed, and I would just set allow, right, instead of block. And so that's why you can see it here in the allowed, because it's already there. That's that manual part that there is no API for yet. Once there is an API for that, then that'll just be part of the scripting. Is once it's deployed, just also turn it to true, because obviously you want it, right? And so that's at that alpha team group level, right? And so this would be the workspace. Theoretically, there would be a bunch of groups or projects underneath this. And the model for this is any group or project that is under this alpha team group has the ability to create a workspace with this agent. So that assume role aspect of it is there for every project and group underneath this, because theoretically, from the customer is not doing it at these top level groups like this. I say top level group, it's really one nested subgroup. They're not really doing it at that level. They're doing it much lower than that. And so their isolation is quite different, right? But I'm not going to build out all of that mapping just for a demo. So essentially it's like, hey, Alpha Team's got one project. So this is kind of the test for that. Um, this is a dev file I was talking about. You do not have to pass a dev file. It'll pick up the GitLab default dev file, and we'll look at both of those workspaces here in just a second. Um, but if you do want to pass something, um, if the container or the image is in a different registry, you can pass it anything in the variables here to pull that down, whatever's necessary. Mine is here, so it doesn't really matter. And I have a UBI 10 image, like I said, that this is going to consume with this dev file. And then the assume role here, this is the role that I wanted to assume. So I'm passing this environment variable in there. So the script that's associated inside of this image will run that. Fun fact about workspaces. If you create an image and you add an entry point or a command associated to your Docker file, it gets dropped. So it doesn't matter what you put there, it gets ignored in workspaces. So you've got to come up with some wrappers around it where essentially I've made it where um, this this image sees this script, and this script runs on a pretty consistent basis to assume role is what it does, right? And so it's going to assume this role also because this role can time out. So it's not perfect, but it's workable. And for what the customer wanted, they were like, yep, perfect. This works for us. It's completely transparent to the end user. They don't see any of it, but we can walk through what that looks like here in just a second from the scripting perspective. So if you want to create we're in this project and you want to create a workspace, you would just click on edit. And if there are no workspaces, it would just say new workspace. And if you already have some, you can just go into them, right? So these two workspaces I created, one of them is created with a dev file, one of them is created without with the default dev file, but I can still go and create a new workspace, right? So this is here by default. If you have a dev file, it's going to try to pick it up. If you want to have multiple dev files, you can do that. You can just create a directory associated with it, right? And then you have your dev files underneath that. So that can be done as well. So you can say, I have specific dev files for certain aspects of my application, especially if you've got an application that's rather large. You may have development environments that are specific to certain parts of your application, right? Or for certain types of testing that are preloaded with certain things or whatever you need to be. So I could take this and I can say use the GitLab default, or I can use the dev file here, but also I have the ability to pass in variables. So if I wanted to change a variable to test in my environment, I could set these variables here. Which makes things super nice because now I can override anything that's defaulted here in this dev file. I can override those pieces to do testing. So if part of my variables is to set version X, right, then I can go in here and set version Y to test it out from whatever it may be. But also I can tell it what branch or ref I want to use. So if I want this to be sitting in the, some feature branch, I can use that feature branch, make changes to it as necessary, do what I've got to do. Let me go ahead and delete that so it doesn't go. I'm not going to create a workspace because I already have some. Um, but we'll go in here and you can stop or terminate it directly from here if you want to, or I can just click on the workspace here and it's going to launch it, right? So this one, see, here's my terminal here. And this is the one that's using the default dev file. So the CLI is not installed. None of that's there. So that's why you can see my AWS S3 LS doesn't work because it's not installed, right? I think, yep, these are the same exact ones. Nope, it's not. So this is the one that doesn't have the dev file. So you can see the command line actually looks a little bit different from a color perspective just because it's using a different image type. This one looks way more naked, but actually let me go back here. We will actually deploy. That's not what I want to do. We'll actually deploy a new workspace just so we can go through this. So we're going to do it based on this dev file, just so you can see kind of what it looks like. It's going to create a new workspace here. It comes into a your work, right? This is no longer in the project. It's at your profile level, right? So you can see I've got my whole list of things, projects, issues, whatever it may be. Workspaces is one of those. So if you're ever looking for a workspace that's already running, that's where you would go. You'd go to your work and you would get this list, and you can also see ones that were recently terminated if they exist. This one says terminating. That's fun. It's been terminating for a long time. Don't know why it's still there. But so I just created this one 31 seconds ago. You can see it's already ready, and I can open that workspace. This runs automatically. And you're going to see, sorry about that. So you see this says already using the correct role with valid credentials because it's checking those things. That script is checking that up front, and just I've got it outputting that just so you know it's got the role. So now I can run an AWS S3 LS, and that is a bucket that is inside of another project. Let me add another session here. And I believe that is inside of this consulting project. Yeah, so Workspaces test Henson. Is that the right one? Yeah, Workspaces test Henson, right? That's where that is living. It's in a completely different project. And I'm able to list out that bucket. There's nothing in here, I don't believe. There's not. I created it just to be able to list it out. So I have that ability to now assume that role by default natively, right? But now I'm on this branch, right? That's associated to whatever I told it to be on. Just like the web IDE, just like any other IDE, you can make changes as necessary, commit files as necessary. You can even come over here and check out different branches from this command line. It's however you want to do things. This is running in its own independent container, right? But it has access to all of this data. So if you create a file here, right? Or if I create a file here, it's going to write it back here, just like it does in your normal IDE. Any questions from that perspective? No? Super understandable. Everybody's like, yeah, this workspaces thing is an easy thing. It's really super useful. One fun thing about workspaces and the web IDE combined is they both are connected by default to OpenVSX, right? So OpenVSX is the open source essentially Visual Studio extensions library, right? But because of that, and we're GitLab and we own the image and everything else, your GitLab plugins are already pre-installed, right? So I have workflow here. I have GitLab Duo already here, right? I can go and start working with it immediately. And this is in your workspace. So now it's associated to those items. I'm waiting for the agentic workflow to come out. So to see if it shows up here natively. And if it does, how fantastic that would be, because now it has context about what's going on in my project, and I can be a lot more functional inside of my project because Duo, as you know, doesn't have um, it doesn't have access to any of this stuff, right? It's kind of isolated. So once that agentic piece gets in, if it's going to be part of the web IDE and part of workspaces, I think that's going to be super useful down the line. But again, it's just like you would do with anything else from a VS Code perspective. You've got all your fun controls here. If you want to install some other extension, right, you can install whatever you want. The only thing is you have to have this enabled on your profile. So let's look at that real quick.
I have a question. I'll see if what you're about to show us about the profile answers the question, and if not, then you let me know when it's a good time to ask.
Okay, go ahead. Just ask.
Well, no, I didn't want to cut you off if you were about to, if I was burying the
No.
lead and you were about to show us. But long story short, you had said that whenever you're configuring the workspaces, that you can set a time to live. I
Hmm.
understood that as like before it has to refresh, and if there's like a new configuration or whatever, for it to pull that down so that you're enforcing, like latest and security practice changes, whatever, on the dev base. Is that correct? Is that the spirit of that part?
It's twofold, right? One, it is the longer they live, the more expensive they are.
That's
Um,
true.
um,
Yeah.
Yep. Two,
Uh,
it pushes best practices for make changes and push commits, right?
mhm.
And get your changes in. Don't have a branch that's out there for, weeks on end that you're not um pushing the code back up to. But the other piece of it is exactly what you were talking about from a security perspective. And this is at the workspaces layer. This is not at the agent layer, right? So
Yeah.
workspaces is going to set those configurations. And so you can say, I don't want anybody having a workspace that lives for more than 12 hours because they're
Yeah.
not working on it for 12 hours, right?
No.
And so what it'll do, you have two things. You can say how long it lives, but you can also say how long it's up. So if the workspace is up for a certain period of time, it will just stop it, right? So when it stops it, there's a persistent volume that's associated to it that will stay there. So when you
Yeah.
restart it, it'll reattach that persistent volume and you'll be essentially right back where you were. If you terminate it, it's gone, right?
Yeah, just
So
like an EC2 instance in AWS. That was
same type
this.
of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, that was the spirit of the question, was that is there persistent storage that's backing this up? But I had assumed that there was, and just been looking at the IAC, it was bleeding all together, and I was like, surely you've missed that part, Jonathan. But the spirit of that confirmation that there's a persistent volume that's backing all this up is that from a developer standpoint, this feature would suck if every time I generated a new workspace or restarted it, if I had to go install those extensions and do all those changes again, right? So I'm happy to see that that's already baked into the feature, that we're good to go.
Right. Yeah. So here's another, this is where you've got to turn this on, right? Web IDE and workspaces. And this is where you have to enable that extension marketplace, right? It's going to open VSX. Another piece of this, we're not going to get into it now because it's mind numbing, is you can actually deploy your own open VSX and put your own extensions in there and make that where that's the only thing available to your users, right? Like this wouldn't even show up in their profile and they could only use that version of it. So you can vet and ensure they got the proper versions of extensions and things of that nature. So when you're in more restrictive environments, it's not just any user that's pushed any extension somebody can go use. Instead, you've got predefined extensions that are necessary. And I've deployed one of those as well for the same customer, and we're not getting into that. It's not fun. And it's not or it's not easy to keep up either. But one good part about extensions that is really useful in from a workspaces perspective is, especially if you're going to use your own image here, right? There's a one second. There is a directory for VS Code to pull extensions from by default. So if there is a bucket of extensions that you already want to have pre-built into your IDE, which is exactly what GitLab is doing here, right? With these, you can go in and take those packages from OpenVSX and download them, put them into those directories, and when your IDE starts up, it will automatically use those packages to install those extensions. So theoretically, you don't have to have an extensions library. You can have pre-baked things for your pre-baked extensions. Again, the image gets a little bit bigger, so it makes your harder, a little bit longer for your workspace to stand up. But from a security perspective, the customer I was working with, that's the way they decided to go, because now instead they're holding all of their extensions inside of Artifactory, and that's where they can pull all their extensions down from. So if you want this, take this and put it in your image and roll with it. So that's another option as well. But you can see here in the Kubernetes cluster, from a resource perspective, let me go to my namespaces here. You'll see that that there's this team one namespace here, right? And you can see that this is the actual agent associated to it. If I were to spin up a workspace under Alpha Team, it's going to automatically create a new namespace. And then the next one would create a new namespace and create a new namespace. And there is a standard naming convention to them, but again, it's just sprawl that's not really necessary. Instead, what I've done, and again, it's in the Terraform if you really want to look at it, if the shared namespace is in that YAML, the namespace has to exist before you try to deploy to it, right? Workspaces isn't going to also create that namespace. So part of that, the Terraform is if they've got a shared namespace, it creates that. But then also the roles associated to the namespaces are separated, right? So if the namespace has to be created because they got a shared namespace, then it automatically attaches that role binding. If not, what it does is it says use this cluster role binding for anything that stands up with this naming convention because it needs it. By default, if you don't pass your own roles, the workspaces functionality will use cluster admin for everything because mint. But that's purely because you've got to get it working, right? That's almost everything you see with any type of deployment is like, hey, we know that this is super wide open and it's there purposely to ensure it's working, and then let's trim these things down. The Terraform that I've put in place already trims those things down, so it's not using the cluster admin by default. Any questions? We've got 18 minutes. Chris, I know you got something, man. Or you've got a good nap, one or the other.
I don't actually, and I haven't been taking a nap. I've been following. But I set a bunch of this stuff up earlier with the agents and workspaces and stuff in our own environment, so I'm kind of familiar with it.
I'm
Not
happy that
to
it was.
steal your thunder.
No, you're good, dude.
Yeah, I'm glad that it was you instead of me having to figure out the nuances. Like, unless it's blatantly blazoned in the documentation, something as simple as, "Hey, doing this kills the Dockerfile CMD and entry point parameters." So good luck with that. And then having to pivot the design resultantly based off of that observation. How difficult was that part?
Um, it wasn't that bad. It was more along the lines of using Docker as Docker, right, with a Docker file, and then going, why isn't this script running? So then you're trying to debug it because
And
entry
you do your
points are entry
Docker
points are entry
info
points,
and
right? It's like you ran a command. Cool. Why is it not executing that? So then like I looked at that and I'm trying to figure things out and I'm looking through logs. And then of course I go look at the documentation and it's stated in the documentation, right?
okay,
But
so that is less the go. Cool.
but it's not one of those things where like you just look at it and go, okay, cool, right? It's one of those things you kind of skim over as you're implementing stuff, right?
Yeah.
Because anything that's got a warning symbol next to it, you kind of ignore as you're trying to implement something at for like a proof of concept for some reason. I'm not the only one. I know that almost everybody does that, right? Then they go back and go, oh, it's blatantly right there, like missed it. But yeah, and then coming up with a method where I can get the file to run when it stands up anyway without that, right? So
Yeah.
here I can show you what that looks like. That's in the operations here I'm building
You're
that
talking
image.
around part of the design that you mentioned. I'm just confirming comprehension here, where you were describing how you had to design for attaching the role. Is that correct? There was some kind
Yes.
of a timing mechanism there whereby you couldn't guarantee that the role would be attached on like startup, but that the script would just cycle back until it was attached. Was that right?
No. Well, yes and no, but it's an assumed role, right? So on startup, when it comes up, it's not running. It's not running the entry point associated to it, right? So I have to have a mechanism that still executes that file.
Hmm.
Is really what it looks at. So like this is the assume role script, and essentially it's installing a bunch of crap as necessary.
Ah, you
And
did say
then
you were going to show this to us. I forgot.
yeah, and then it's just like pulling the data to see if it exists, right? And if they're expired, right? And then this is the actual assume role aspect of it. It's got a lot of crap in here that are checks, but it's because it has to be there. Otherwise, you keep getting output to the command line, right? Because it's running a script. And yeah,
Yeah.
you can hide those, but the problem is if you hide them and it's not working, there's no way to
Yeah.
debug it then,
Yeah.
right?
You don't want silent
Um,
failures. That's bad design.
yeah, so this is essentially doing that, and you can see already using the correct role, right?
Yeah.
So that's essentially how that is rolling just from that perspective.
Hmm.
And then you can see in here, I've got a bunch of stuff being installed. Just so you know, UBI 9 will not work because there's a version of GCC, I think it is, that is not current enough to work with the Web IDE or with the VS Code Web. So UBI 9 won't work even if you have. There's no package that's new enough for it. So UBI 10 is kind of the earliest for what we offer because we don't have the ability to pull old images in workspaces. It's all being done from a CDN that we have no control over when you deploy your workspace. And so I have it going and just getting the CLI here because you can't do anything without the CLI from that perspective. And then it's doing some install work here. Pretty straightforward. And then it's just going to make this directory, copy that over, execute it, and then it's going to source this, right? And so when it sources this, it adds it to the bash RC because the bash RC runs when it's coming up as opposed to as an entry point. So I allowed it to essentially be part of the profile, and then it can run that execution automatically to get those things done as part of the profile. So it doesn't look like it looks like it's part of the entry point, but it's not. I don't
Look at you being a pro Linux administrator.
It's Claude helped.
Look at you being a pro vibe coder.
So I mean, really, it came down to is it was like, what options do I have, right? And which one is going to look the cleanest, right? And this is really where it became the cleanest was that's the only thing that I can affect that Workspaces is not going to override, right? After much testing. And so that just creates the image here. And like I said, there's UBI 9, UBI 10, UBI 9. So I can show you what happens actually. Let me go to. So you can see in the dev file here, I'm passing assume role is this. I'm passing this image. You know what? I'm just going to edit this directly. Don't tell anybody. We're not supposed to do that, right? And I'm just going to change this to UBI 9, right? Yeah, cool. Whatever. Update it. And so now if I create a new workspace here, and I'm going to use that dev file. I could have created another dev file. I could have put it in with variables, but I'm not going to mess with any of that stuff. I'm going to let this create. It deploys. It's there. The AWS piece still works like we think it would work, but there's a problem with the IDE, and I'll show you here in just a second. And this is one of those things where it deployed, and I'm like, oh, this is great. It's fantastic, right? It deployed. I can see it. I can run my AWS commands. I wasn't worried about the basic functionality of the IDE itself until all of a sudden I started messing with it, and I was like, oh, there's a problem here. Can anybody see what the problem is right off the bat here?
I give up.
Nothing because it magically worked.
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
You see, like you've got this source control graph here. You can't actually use any. This is actually didn't come up at all before. So I'm wondering if UBI 9 pushed package updates that we didn't have. Right here, see this? Didn't
Oh, okay.
initialize
All the
web view.
initializers. Yeah.
So yeah, so
hit the timeout.
yeah, so you've got this issue, right, where Duo Chat is dead in the water, right? Like there's a lot of things that don't function as intended. Even when you make changes, if you go to push them, you get all sorts of weird errors that pop up and don't like this whole like sidebar thing is very funky. And you don't really notice it until all of a sudden it doesn't work and you're like, whoa, what's going on? But this actually didn't even show, so this is kind of promising. But like I said, UBI 10 does it. If you use UBI is not even in the supported list, but that's what my customer needed because that's what they use. So where is the create a custom workspace image here? I think they even tell you, let me see here. It's not in here. I'd have to find out exactly what it is, but there's a list of that's not what I wanted. There's a list of what the heck? There we go. That's not how you spell that. Right here. So workspace container requirements, Debian and Ubuntu is the only thing that's been tested on. So this is the problem. Yeah, glibc is the underlying issue that causes that issue. So feel free to play with it, but it does do weird things. Just from my experience of doing that. So I went to UBI 10. Also a note, if you're wanting to run UBI, you either have to install a whole bunch of stuff, which you got to install some stuff anyway. But there is native support for a lot of the things in the toolbox image already. If you don't use a toolbox image, this list gets like 5 times this for the install. And you end up missing a bunch of dependencies, and there's like version mismatches, and it got really crazy. So I just went with the toolbox image because I'm lazy. So if you want to play with it, I know Chris, you're a big fan of UBI, or used to be at least.
I still am. I still am.
So yeah, you can go to like UBI minimal if you want to, but things get a little bit weird. But there's just a lot of dependencies that were needed there to make that function. So if you want to use UBI in work or in the workspaces, you can just use UBI 10, which I think came out of beta like 2 months ago, maybe. It's really new.
So perhaps it's a low value question, but if we have a situation where we've got developers who have to do context switching, right? You were making the case for, oh, you can create more than one workspace. Is there an easier way to give some sort of identifying characteristic like a tag or name customization to the workspace? Did I miss that part? So that you can tell like, oh, this workspace has this workspace has that. Because I saw like all the random naming convention. I was like, oh, that's low value for me as an end user because that tells me jack about what it is. Like I just have to remember like, oh, this is the one that has that stuff on it.
Right. So that's one of the things, and like I said, I talked with the backend engineers today, and I said, the workspace here, this is going from main, but I don't know that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So at least if I know what branch it's associated to, and then also, if anything is, I told them if anything is off from the dev file, if I put in any custom variables or whatever it is, I think that when you go to create a workspace here, come on, I got to pick one of these ones that I know is attached. This is, yeah, from here, it's a little bit difficult. There is like, I think it should only show ones that have agents installed, not every project out there. So like from here, if it's anything from the default, I think it should be listed there, right? Put it into the description, right? I changed the project reference, right? I used the dev file, but I passed variables. But even with the variables here, I think there should be a check mark here that's sensitive or not, right? So if it's sensitive, you can give me the key, but not the value. So at least I know like that was entertained, right?
Yeah.
If it's not sensitive, then you can output the key and the value to the screen, because yeah, people are going to put a bunch of things here, or may put a bunch of things here, but then at least from this screen, I have some semblance of what I did. Right. But I mean, at least it's the project. Theoretically, you're not going to have like numerous workspaces for the same exact project doing the same exact things, theoretically. But that doesn't mean you won't. But yeah, I agree. There needs to be some other context that's in here that tells you like it's not just this project.
Yeah, I'm sure they're still iterating on it, and I'm sure they got a long backlog and all that fun stuff. I guess more so, I just didn't know what came out of y'all's conversation for what's on the horizon.
Yeah, so like I told you, there's like standard naming conventions. Like this is the agent ID that's associated to these workspaces for this project, right? Or any project under Alpha Team, right? They're all going to start with workspace 2142887. Same thing with anything that's under Team 1, right? 214886. That's the agent ID that's associated to it. So like there's a little bit of information that's associated. You can go back and go, okay, this is running here, but it doesn't tell you what you've done once you've deployed the workspace.
Yeah.
Or what
And
you
so
did
like
while you're deploying the workspace.
more stupid and comprehension type questions. So your example was that, you were showing how to attach to this AIM role, and you were showing how you'd configured it so that you were installing AWS CLI, like super standard design stuff, right? And so the question that I have here is that I want to understand is there underlying infrastructure? Like, can you make this run on any underlying infrastructure on a cloud provider? So
Um,
are all these like actual AWS instances in your particular account, or is that not what these individual workspaces represent?
Workspaces will only deploy on Kubernetes.
Okay, so like, but that Kubernetes can be like self-hosted. It could be with AWS. Like it's
Wherever you want it, as long as you
okay.
can access it.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So then,
We do
if
have a lot of examples to deploy it in AWS.
yeah,
So that makes life a lot easier. But theoretically it can be in any
Mhm.
Kubernetes cluster.
So then these technically aren't for that instance, and thank you for correcting my terminology. So then for that purpose, they're not EC2 instances, but it's more like saying, hey, I'm going to add a node to my pod. Is that more what we're saying here?
Yeah, I mean, come on, it's Kubernetes in the cloud, right? It's just somebody else's computer on top of somebody else's computer on top of somebody else's computer, right?
Yeah.
That's literally all it is. So, I mean, it's wherever you want to run it, it doesn't matter. It's all backed by EC2 anyway. You just don't have direct access to it, right?
Well, so that was the spirit of me trying to confirm comprehension here is that, Kubernetes is not EC2. One's an orchestration solution, one is a compute solution. So that's the part that I was really trying to gel here is that I thought at first we were saying that we were, actually spinning up EC2 instances. Like if I went into my AWS management console, I could see one to one, like, oh, this workspace's EC2 instance. But if we're saying that it only requires as a design solution Kubernetes, then to me as a DevOps professional, that tells me that it's spinning up a node inside the Kubernetes pod, and
Hmm.
that's how the solution is working. So I wasn't trying to be pedantic, but I was trying to understand which one of the AWS managed services are we talking about? Are we talking about like EKS? Are we talking about
Yeah, this is running through.
EC2?
Yeah, this is EKS. This isn't running
Okay.
Kubernetes on an EC2,
Okay,
right?
cool. Yeah, that's what I was trying to get at. Yeah.
But what you would typically see from a Kubernetes cluster, right, running in AWS, especially when you're spinning off all these nodes, is you would see like you've got workloads here associated with pod templates and whatever. They don't exist because what's happening is when you click create a workspace inside of GitLab, it's got the code in the back end that knows where the CDN is to go pull these things. And then the agent itself has the proper permissions to then essentially run your kubectl commands, right, to deploy this. So if you look at like pod templates, right, there's nothing here. And like, but it's all spinning up the same thing. Well, it is. They're pod templates that just live somewhere else, and it's
Mhm.
just making the call to deploy it. So there's kind of like a weird disconnect here where the only way that you can see if things are breaking or what things are breaking is if you like go and you look at like if you go look at like this alpha team pod, right? Here's the GitLab agent that's associated to it, and you can see like the stuff that it's passing, and then you can go into your kubectl commands or kubectl commands and use the information that you gain here to then look at what's running and how it's running, right? Because these naming conventions are going to change. They're not going to be standard. It's all going to be based on how it's being deployed.
Mhm.
Um, but then let me go here. So you can see like all these different workspaces, right, are pulling down different images, right? This is a workspaces tool. This is, there's a bunch of things that are happening. Here's the init container that's running. Here's a tooling container, right? This is mine. So you've got these different things that are happening based on commands that are coming from your GitLab server. And you can't really see those. So you'll come into this like a init container, and it's like, okay, now I've got information associated to this. I can go look and see why this was failing, right?
Yeah,
Get the
no, that's
logs
perfect.
there.
That helps to bring it full circle with both, what does how do we administer the feature in the platform, and then what is it actually doing with the, with the sorry, I'm talking too fast from my brain. What is that actually doing with your infrastructure to affect the entirety of the solution to make it all gel?
Yeah, so the
Um,
good piece is like I have this name in GitLab Workspaces, and I'm running two different agents now, but I can run any number of agents theoretically as long as I have enough resources, right? And I can spread those out. Um, it's not, I mean, I wouldn't say run, 500 different GitLab agents on one Kubernetes cluster. I think you're going to run into issues with resources over time. But theoretically it could be done, as long as you've got your sizing properly and you're scaling out properly. But
You're really
yeah,
trying to test out the S and EKS, huh? Or
so
excuse me, the E and EKS.
yeah, so it's there's kind of a lot of things that would need to be balanced to run it at scale, just ensure you've got it under control. But it just goes back to everything else that we talk with customers pretty frequently, right? Is if you don't have the Kubernetes knowledge on your team to support this, don't think that it's just an easy button solution, because when something goes wrong or during deployment when something is not working properly, if you don't know how to track back from like, hey, here's the pod name, okay, great, or how do I even get the proper pod name to find out what's going on and get the logs from it, right? If you don't have that information, or what setting I need to set so this all just doesn't get deleted when something fails, right? There's a bunch of things that have to be played with. So if you don't have the Kubernetes kind of knowledge base already, it's one of those things where it becomes unsupportable long term.
Yeah. Everybody doesn't have a Scott.
It's not me. I am not a Kubernetes ninja. I can tell you that right now.
Yeah, everybody doesn't have a Glenn. Yeah.
Putting in the solutions architect hat, because you kind of went through this last like about a week ago with somebody. Where this can shine is in really like two major use cases. The first is like non-technical people making edits, right? So like one of the big things is inside GitLab is like everybody can edit the handbook, et cetera, et cetera. But you've got like a lot of people in leadership positions and management positions who may not have, a code editor on their computer and like their Git terminal. They may not know Git and this, that, and the other thing. This gives it makes it a little bit easier for them to make edits. And then the other thing is like government people who have really, really big lockdown machines, giving them these workspaces can make it so they have access to a lot more than their machines allow.
Yeah. Also, it pairs with that as well, Chris. Of we have a lot of customers that have third party developers, right, that are contracted, and they come in and come out fairly frequently. And so onboarding those developers to be able to work, you do not have to give them a monster machine that has all these things that they can install. Instead, throw them a Dell and let them jump on the internet, right?
Yeah.
And essentially that's all they need to get up and running. They can start developing code now.
Yep. We've
So
I've had at least two clients so far do that, where they've set up like a not in GitLab, but like a coder instance or something for us to like modify the Terraform and apply the Terraform.
yeah, there's as this grows, I see a lot of capacity to it, but also now you don't have to worry about people's authentication on their local machines either. So I don't know what everybody else is seeing, but I'm seeing more and more questions about how do I limit the access to my source code, right? Where they're developers, they're not even wanting to open up like their entire VPN space to talk to their GitLab instance. Instead, they want to say that wants to be even more isolated. So they're requiring their developers to connect to a jump box to develop on that jump box, because it has controlled access to the endpoints, right? When you get into that kind of weird space, all of a sudden it becomes very difficult for developers to get anything done, because those sessions keep dying or whatever it may be, right? And that's where workspaces can really shine, is now you can open up a workspace. One drawback right now is the workspace is assigned to you, right? They're looking at sharing workspaces, and that's one thing that I talked about as well. Is it would be nice if I could start this workspace and start doing work on it, and then just go over here and click a button and say, assign this workspace to Jonathan, because he's on the next shift, right? And just pass it off, and he can see all the history of stuff I've been doing. Yes, I should still commit my code, right? But that doesn't mean that there's not stuff inside of that workspace that's usable for them to leverage, right? And so that's kind of they're looking at how can you do that, or how can you have a workspace that is being used by numerous people, which is a whole other beast in my opinion, but that's something they are looking at.
Well,
So
thank you both Scott and Chris for the user stories, the context examples, because it's helpful to me to understand what the use case for this is, right? Even something as simple as when I got my replacement MacBook and I was like, ooh, let me go do a documentation change. And I was like, crap, I haven't yet installed VS Code locally. I can't go do that because it requires building. And then so y'all see where the point there is going. But yeah, it would be a game changer to be able to not be blocked by something like that and to not have to reconfigure crap every time you get something as simple as a hardware refresh.
well, another thing you got to think about is when you're connecting to like a self-managed instance, right? And you want to use the GitLab workflow plugin, or you want to use Duo, or you want to use one of those items, right? You got two options. You've got a token or you've got OIDC. Well, if you don't have OID set up, or it's not working, or there's a problem with it, or you can't use it, then now all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, your users have to pass personal access tokens to get the access. Oh, but we require that tokens are never can be valid. Personal access tokens can never be valid for more than 30 days.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So every 30 days now your users have to go and pull a token just to connect back, when in the web IDE, it does it natively, right? It's automatically taking those credentials. And also in the web IDE, a lot of the environment variables that GitLab has pre-established are available there as well. So you can leverage them right out of the box, right? You can just get your project ID right there. So any variable that you have set in your CI/CD variables, that's not masked. You can't use masked variables directly, but you can pull those variables out. And that's another piece that they're looking at right now as well, is getting this off of Kubernetes as it sits and having it where people can actually run this on their GitLab runners as well. So your runner can deploy a workspace essentially,
I
which
won't
is
poke the bear and
super fancy.
I won't poke the bear and get you to give me your opinion on the changes that they're making to the the job tokens.
Yeah, let's not go there right now.
I
We don't have time for
I
that.
was messing with stuff the other day. I was like, why is this not working anymore? And I was like, oh crap, they're iterating on that feature. Great.
Yeah, so yeah, I think we're at time. Any last questions?
Great demo and great work, and I'm sure this was not an overnight gig, but well, I know personally it wasn't an overnight gig. I can be transparent, but yeah, I think you did a really great job.
Yeah,
Joe,
thank you.
Chris, Glenn, anything?
No, I thought it was great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks, Scott.
Yeah, for sure. Y'all have a good weekend.
Thank you.
All right.
too.
Thanks so much, folks. Take care all.